A very happy Palm Sunday to you today. As I mentioned earlier and has been noted before, this is one of the high points of the Christian calendar, and it's a real delight for my family and me to celebrate this day with you. Now, in our study of the Gospel of Mark this winter, now into spring, our friend Andrew already spoke a few weeks ago on the triumphal entry passage in Mark chapter 11, the main event of Palm Sunday. So it might seem odd, though understandable, to have this passage come up again today and read it again. Like, didn't we just read that a couple of weeks ago? And the answer is yes, you are remembering correctly. But then to read the hosannas just a few minutes before reading the account in Mark 15 might have been a little bit jarring, from Hosanna to crucify in just a few days. Well, for them it was a few days. For us it was just a few minutes. This is intentional. For centuries, the church around the world has traditionally read both passages in the Palm Sunday liturgy. That means that the same people who begin worship saying Hosanna shortly thereafter find themselves saying crucify. It's unsettling, but it's not haphazard. Nor is it cynical, as if pastors all got together one day and said, a lot of people skip out on the Good Friday service, so let's sneak that passage in on Palm Sunday just to make sure we get everyone. It's not the reason. No, the reason that the church traditionally reads both of these passages on the same day is that the words of the crowd in these two passages illustrate a central problem with people everywhere. For that reason, I want to take the next few moments to look at the Mark 15 text a little more closely, the second one that was read for you. And I want to look at this passage through the eyes of the crowd. We'll take a moment and think about these people. The crowd whose voices we heard in the reading lived at the time of the height of the Roman Empire, the dominant force in the world. And they did not live in the Roman Empire as Roman citizens. That might have been comparatively good for them. No, instead, they lived as an oppressed people in a backwater of the empire, somewhere over in what we think of as the Middle East. They were routinely mistreated and had been the objects of unspeakable injustice by their Roman overlords, personified here by Pontius Pilate. In fact, some of the Jewish holidays that are still celebrated to this day find their origins back in the period of Roman domination. Hanukkah goes back to that very period in which the Jewish people were so sorely mistreated and abused by Rome, and yet God delivered them. So the crowd in this story is a group of people without power, without rights, and without hope. They were truly oppressed. And we find them in verse 6, somewhat surprisingly, being offered a kind of clemency, is the best word I can think of. Pilate has this custom in which at Passover he releases one prisoner of the people's choosing. Friends, this may look like mercy. I'm using the word clemency, but in reality, this is a cunning tool of the oppressor. There's no rhyme or reason for this clemency. Why is Pilate doing this at Passover? Why is Pilate releasing just one person? Well, the reason is it's simply his own whim as their overlord. I get to do this because I have the power. I have the power to put in prison, and I have the power to set free. What might look at first like an act of mercy is in fact an exercise of power. By doing so, Pilate is emphasizing his authority over them, his power to imprison whomever he wants and release whomever he wants. And yet, at the same time, like so much of life, there's some good mixed in with this bad, because he is going to release somebody, someone, in fact, that the people get to choose. And even though Pilate has his preference, he wants the people to release Jesus, he gives the people the opportunity to vote. Verse 9, do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? And so these oppressed people are granted a kind of clemency, one tiny window in which they have agency. We can do something. It's a single opportunity where they can speak and their overlord will respond. But no sooner do we sense the faintest hint of relief for these people, we hear another powerful voice dominating them. In verse 11, it turns out it's the chief priests. That is, their religious rulers, the ones who ought to be providing truth and comfort and love and community and wisdom. They instead are themselves filled with jealousy. Even Pilate can see right through it, right through them. He sees that it's out of their envy, their sense that Jesus has displaced them. And they don't want to lose their place, so they have turned him in on made-up charges to try to eliminate him. It's out of envy that they have done this, which is why Pilate would rather release Jesus. But it's out of their envy that they exercise, these chief priests exercise their influence on the crowd. We've seen this throughout the Gospel of Mark, that the religious leaders are not all that they appear to be, much less all that they ought to be. These leaders would actually use their ability to dismiss people from temple worship to coerce behavior. This happens in John chapter 9. You can read it this afternoon if you like. In John chapter 9, Jesus heals a man who was born blind. And in the process of figuring out what happened, the religious leaders questioned the parents of the man born blind. Is this your son? Yes. Was he born blind? Yes. How is it that he sees now? He's old enough, ask him. Because they were afraid that the religious leaders were going to shut them out of temple worship, which was more than just a spiritual thing in that culture. It was societal. To be shut out of worship is to be treated as dead to everyone in the community. They don't have, the religious rulers don't have the power that Rome has, but whatever power they do have, they're using it to coerce behavior. And so these people, this crowd in our story, they are doubly oppressed, if you will, not only by the Romans, but by their own religious authorities. So this crowd, already under the thumb of Rome, knows that they are also under the inescapable influence of the chief priests. And prompted by them, the people reply to Pilate's offer of clemency, give us Barabbas. Verse 11. Grant us a murderer, someone whose crimes were well known. Now, I said Pilate kind of put it to a vote, but it's not like our election season where there are weeks and people could campaign and people had Barabbas buttons, people had Jesus buttons. Like, that's not what's happening here. It's sort of a mob scene. The chief priests did not need to remind the people who Barabbas was. They all knew who he was. And in an instant, they were able to persuade them to release a known murderer. That's how much under the thumb of the religious leaders they are. Yes, we'd rather have a known murderer walking amongst us rather than go against these religious leaders. The people have no choice but to do what the chief priests want. And all of this culminates in Pilate's question. What do you wish me to do with the man you call the King of the Jews? This one your chief priests brought me on false charges. Pilate knows Jesus has done nothing wrong. If you carefully study the four Gospels, you'll see over and over and over again, Pilate declares his verdict in the case. I find no fault in him. What evil has he done? There's nothing worthy of death done in him. And in the end, famously, he washes his hands of the whole thing and says, I'm innocent of the blood of this just man. If you look carefully, 7 times he pronounces his verdict, not guilty. And yet the people, spurred on by their religious leaders, cry out, crucify. Crucify this one who healed the sick. Crucify this one who brought good news to the poor. Crucify this one who told us of God's kingdom. Crucify this one who spoke truth to power. Crucify him. And in that moment, a deep tragedy and a dark irony of human history cast its shadow over the scene. For in that moment, the oppressed became the oppressor. Those who had for all their lives lived under the thumb of Rome took the one faint whisper of clemency, the one occasion all year when their voice would be heard, and they used it wrongfully to oppress an innocent person. This is, I say, one of the deepest tragedies and darkest ironies of the human heart. That the people who experience oppression should become the oppressor. That the abused should become the abuser. That the mistreated should learn to mistreat. Please understand, this is not victim blaming. The oppressed here in this story are not culpable for their being oppressed. When people are abused, that abuse is not their fault. That's not what the scriptures say. The Bible is clear that God holds, in particular, rulers, political rulers, religious rulers. God holds these rulers accountable for their actions. Just read the Old Testament prophets sometimes. It's hair-raising how God speaks about oppressive human leaders. So this is not victim blaming. But what this passage illumines for us is the sad reality that my having been wronged does not prevent me from turning around and doing the same to someone else. You would think someone who has experienced being wronged would know not to treat someone else this way. And yet, friends, we do it all the time. And sometimes that abuse or mistreatment or oppression happens in the very same ways. Part of the rancor of the political discourse in this moment is that both polarized sides, part of their justification for what they do when they're in power is, well, it's not as bad as what the other side did the last time they had power. And then the other group gets power, and they do something, and people say, well, wait a second, you shouldn't do that. Well, it's not as bad as what they did back then. Do you see it? No, I am not at fault for the negative experiences inflicted on me, but I am at fault when I inflict negative experiences on others, my own past notwithstanding. Every one of us has to grapple with this dark irony in our hearts, where we can take the slightest bit of power, the meagerest whisper, and use it to harm another. One of the cosmic questions I often find myself asking is, God, how in the world are you going to right every wrong? How will you ultimately reverse injustice? How is it possible that you will finally restore all things? I believe all of those things, and I find myself asking, how? Because even just think about this one tragic reality of oppressed becoming oppressor. Just that one slice of the injustice in the world. And pretty soon you'll start thinking about how that happens within generations in a family. Well, why was this person abusive? Because, well, they were abused. And what was their story? Because they were abused. And you see these chains going back as far as anyone can remember. You see it in individuals, and you see it in families, and you see it in neighborhoods, and you see it in cities, and you see it in nations. And I'm like, God, how in the world are you going to parse all of that? Because it's all this mixed in the messiness of human existence. But here's the wonder of this passage for us today. I may never know how God can set such a complicated mess right. I may never know how God will deal with every instance that the abused became the abuser, or the oppressed became the oppressor. But from our readings today, I do know this. This is the reason Jesus came. Jesus came to set it right. He is the one, in Mark 11, our first reading, acclaimed as the king, seated on a donkey, riding into the capital of his people's own kingdom. He is the one of whom the people cried, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." He is the one to whom they prayed, "Hosanna, save us, Son of David." And yet, after a lifetime that he himself also lived under the thumb of Rome, in that moment, on Palm Sunday, he was entrusted with all the power and authority of the rightful king. This oppressed one, in that moment, did not turn around and oppress. He didn't even stay in Jerusalem for the night. Now, that's a way to take a city. Come in triumphantly and then go stay in Bethany for the night. I got friends over there. I'll crash with them. See, friends, Jesus did the opposite of every human being who has ever lived. Never once did he use his oppressed status as a justification to abuse another. Never once did he take never once in a single moment did he take his power and turn it for his own advantage or twisted it like a knife in someone else's back. Never once did Jesus, the oppressed, cry out for someone else's death. Crucify her. Crucify them. Crucify him. Because God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world. But that the world might be saved through him. John 3:17. See, Jesus lived like no one else. Every single day, he laid down his life. He laid down his power for the people around him. And then at the end of his days, he died like no one else. He was murdered at the hands of those two powers. And in his death, Jesus looks at people like us who are broken and straying and confused. And he offers us not a moment of clemency, but an eternity of mercy. He offers you not a moment of possibility, but a lifetime of forgiveness. And then because Jesus had done nothing wrong, because he was truly innocent, on the third day, Jesus rose from the dead. He rose from the dead to overthrow the power of injustice. He rose from the dead to upend the power of oppression in all of its forms, political, religious, societal, spiritual, ultimately to upend the oppressive spirit that lives in the human heart, that longs to dominate other people, even on the smallest of scales. I was watching The Big Bang Theory, reruns of The Big Bang Theory, and there are these episodes where these science nerds, right, those are the main characters, have a moment where they're making fun of this other character because he wasn't quite so bright. And so they were just making fun of this other character. The bullied, they talk about this so often in the show, the bullied in that moment became the bully. See, it's comical and it's real. It's what we do. It's that spirit in our hearts. Jesus rose from the dead to upend that spirit that yearns to exercise dominion over other people for our good rather than for their joy. So I don't have a full answer to how God is going to right every wrong. But friends, in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, God has told us that oppression will not win. Injustice will not win. Evil will not win. Even the evil that we lamentably find in our own hearts and far too often put out into the world. Even that evil will not win. God will redeem. God will restore. God will make all things new. He will not let our problem with power be the final word. Jesus is the final word. So here's what this means for us. Practically, this week, here's what the contradiction of Palm Sunday means. This beautiful contradiction of passages and emotions. What do we do with this deep tragedy and dark irony of the human heart? Well, we who know Jesus follow him by laying down our grip on power. Doesn't mean like you resign all the positions you have. But you stop wielding it, whatever authority you have, in whatever sphere we're talking, work, home, friendships, community, this church. Whatever opportunities you have to serve, you use them actually to serve other people and not to serve yourself. You act in their best interest. You listen to other people's input and let their input shape your decisions. You bend whatever power you have towards someone else because whatever power it is that you hold right now, it's not forever. Someone else is going to sit at your desk someday. Someone else will be the patriarch or matriarch of your family. Someone else will be the center of that cluster of friends. So you don't have to grip onto the power. You can follow Jesus. Wherever we have responsibilities of leading, the gospel of Jesus has taught us a new way to live. We no longer leverage people to improve our standing. Instead, we use whatever influence we have for the good of another. We live not to make ourselves great. We live to make others whole. This is the path our King has trod. And by his grace, let us follow. Would you pray with me, please? How great are you, O God? Beyond our comprehension, that you will someday right every wrong and correct every injustice, including our own sins that we put out into the world. You are good, and we thank you for your mercy in Jesus. And we pray that on this day, you would grant us grace and courage to lay down our grip on power and to use whatever opportunities we have to love, to bless, to listen, and yes, to lead with the Spirit of Jesus. For we ask in his name. Amen.